Hello everybody and welcome to part 3 here on using the Toon action from Adobe. Part 3, this has the action has now run, and this is what I'm left with. A pretty cool photo, a pretty cool image I should say, that has this really great filter attached to it. What I want to do though is go over some of the ways that you can customize this. If you're not familiar with working with layers and how to work with layer masks, it may not be clear on how to actually make this image perfect the way that you want. So let's jump into it. Here we are in Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and hit the Tab key. Actually, I'm going to hit two keys. I want to share two things with you. One is that the F key, if I click the F key, it will cycle through 3 different views. This view here is going to show us no tools. This view here will show us some tools and it'll show a smaller screen, and this view will show us full screen. I'm going to go ahead and choose this middle view, and basically I want to get rid of the tabs and I want to have this be full screen, but I also want to have access to my tools. Then I want to hit the Tab key on the keyboard, and that will get rid of the tools. Stay with me. What I'm going to do next is go to Window, Layers. So because there are so many layers, look at all these layers. There are more too. Look at all of this. This is what this action does. It creates a lot of layers. What I want to do is just have my layers palette, and then later I can go back to the smaller layers palette if I want. And let's go through each layer or each group and talk about ways that we might want to customize this action after it's done. It's highly customizable, and I'll show you some of the things that you may want to do. Let's go through from the top. So the first thing that I want to make a note of is when you're working with layers, you may want to turn a layer visibility on or off. So the eyeball will turn that layer visibility on or off. This is a group, we can tell by the folder right here, and then this little down caret. If I click on that down caret, it actually shows me that everything that's been done is in that group. And then if I hit the down caret again, it'll show me everything that's in that group. It's nice to see. We still have our background, we still have the focus, although the eyeball isn't on. If I turn the eyeball on, it could screw it up, although because it's below this group, it shouldn't be doing too much. What we're going to do is go through each layer or group here. So it says here, replace with your text. If I turn this eyeball off, we can see what it is doing, what that layer is doing. So the eyeball indicates visibility, so we're going to click that on and off just to see what happens when we do that. And you can see Photoshop is taking a half second to respond because there's so many layers. This is a very large file, and you actually may be able to hear the fan of the laptop. Means that the laptop's working hard. Doing this with an older machine may be a little bit challenging or a little bit slow. This machine's fairly new and it's still kind of slow. But let's get through it. To start with, I don't need any text on this image, so I'm going to turn that layer off. And I can do that by just clicking this eyeball. Now it says Post FX. If I wanted to see what was in this group, I could click this little down caret to minimize it or maximize it. And it says Border, Hue Saturation, Level, and Grains. Let's turn the eyeball off on that group just to see if there is something there. And there is. So this Post FX is the border. And we turn that back on. I think we want that border, so we'll keep it. Scrolling down now, you can see this is color-coded. This is the FGFX. Let's turn that eyeball off and see what that is. So that's some squiggly lines around the outside of the subject. And we can also scroll down and see that not all of them are selected. So here there's one that after the action runs, it's actually defaulted to unselect that little eyeball. If I click that eyeball, it actually adds some black lines so we can see. If we want to add some effects or take away effects, we have to go through each of these layers here, each of these groups. And we can see particles 1, particles 2, dots 1, dots 2. Let's turn particles 1 off. Look for what's happening. Oh, so there's particles, little dots kind of floating around, and then turn it back on. I think those are good. Let's keep them. Particles 2, looking carefully. Yeah, I like those too. Dots 1. And then turn that back on. And so you're going to do this with each layer, believe it or not, because what we want to do is, let's look at my eye here. There's a squiggle that goes kind of right through my mouth and then right through my eye. We don't want to have those squiggles show up. So we want to figure out which layer those squiggles are on, and then we're going to use the layer mask to block that effect from happening in that one area. We don't want to turn the whole effect off. We just want to block that effect from happening in that one area. So they are in the FGFX. So I'm going to just keep going. I bet they're lines. So I'm going to click on this eyeball here. Yep, so that's line effect 1 and line effect 2. So the black and the white. If I turn both of those off, those lines go away. We could just keep the whole image without those lines, but I kind of like the lines around everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those on, and I'm going to show you how to block the effect in just that area of my eye. You'll notice this white box next to each layer, and if we go to line effect and we click on that box is called a layer mask. And if I mouse over it, you may be able to see that pop up. Layer mask thumbnail. And so with the layer mask selected, what I want to do is go back and grab my brush tool and brush with a black brush over the area that I want to disappear on this layer. It's a little complicated, so let me walk you through it. I'm going to hit the tab key to start with, and that's going to bring back my tools. I'm going to get the brush tool over here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the X key again because I want the black to be in the foreground now because I want to paint with black. All right, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to make sure I have the layer mask selected on line effect 1, so I'm going to click on that, and then I'm just going to paint over my eye. And you can see the line disappears from that area, the white line. And then what I need to do is do the same thing for line effect number 2. I scroll down, select the layer mask, and then paint over my eye here. So the layer mask will allow us to hide certain areas of that particular layer. And in this case, I think I'm also going to do this here, kind of in this part of my cheek, and I'll do the same thing for line effect 1. So I'll scroll back up, click on the layer mask on line effect 1. I just think it's a little distracting. It's sort of cutting into the portrait in a way that's, I think it's fine on my forehead, but when you're talking about a portrait, this particular part of the face, you could make creative choices however you want if you wanted to hide that line somewhere else. I'm going to hit the tab key again, and then I'm going to go back up to my window, and I'm going to click on layers so that I can look at what's next. So line effect 1, line effect 2, if we turn those off, we can see the whole effect, but when we turn them on, because our layer masks now have that black area covering the layer, it's going to block the effect from happening in those areas of my cheek and eye. Let's go down here, drops. I like the drops, we're going to keep the drops. Toon detail, let's turn that whole group off and see what that looks like. So that looks like some kind of detail here in the whole Toon. We can leave that group. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to minimize each group as we go down. That's going to allow us to kind of focus on one thing at a time. So I'm going to look at this Toon lines now, turn that group off, and then back on. So that's really that outer kind of line that goes around the whole thing. That looks good to me, so I'm going to minimize it. Although we want to just go down here and look, line 3 detail. So there's one that's unselected. Let's click that. I actually like the way that looks, so I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to put that back on and then minimize it. There are no unchecked visibility eyeballs here in the green layer, so let's see what that looks like. Toon color. That's the overall color. We want to keep that, so let's minimize that. We're into the blue now. Now we're into the border effects. So there are a lot of options here for the border effects. It says border hatching, that's number 1. Let's turn this whole thing off and then back on. So that's some of that sloppiness that's sort of around the subject. Right now it's border hatching. Let's turn that off and see. That's pretty subtle. I'm not seeing a big difference when I turn that off. It's pretty subtle, so I'll leave it. Ripple 1 isn't selected. Let's see what happens when we choose that. Okay, so it adds a little something to the background there. Ripple 2. Add some white. So I actually like the sort of effect. The more the better, I think. So let's turn on Ripple 4. That looks cool. So you can kind of define for yourself in the blue section, the border effects, what the outer kind of line looks like. Let's go ahead and minimize that, and so on and so on. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but basically, by going through and looking at each layer, turning visibility on or off, you can choose which effects to include and which effects not to include. If you just go with the default, okay, maybe that's okay. But I think most of us are going to want to look at some options here. And specifically, I'm going to jump ahead to the background and BG patterns, background patterns. You can see there are a lot of these that are unchecked in terms of the visibility. The eyeball is off because typically you only want to choose one at a time. So if we turn it off, That's that sort of line that's coming out around the background. We want some kind of background there. So turn it off and then turn the next one on. Instead of doing multiple, maybe 1 and 2 look okay together. I think they do. But you may only want one or the other. If you do 1, 2, and PT lines 2 and PT circles 1, things get really busy really quickly. You know, is this a bad thing? Not necessarily. So you can layer these, but I would recommend being patient and looking at all of your options before you settle on one. So I'm going to uncheck those. I'm just going to choose the first 2 just for ease of use and to kind of move on to the next thing. I'm going to minimize that. And the last but not least is the BG color. And if you double click this little box here, double click that little box, you can change the color of the background. You can see that it's shades of blue here. What I'm going to do is I can go up and down on this little line of color here. Let's choose a red or a pink and then see what happens. I'm going to click OK. So that changed it up a little bit. Double click this again. You should be able to. There we go. It's taking a little while for it to load, again, because it's such a big file, but you can change the colors of the background with this BG color panel by opening up that color picker, and it's a color picker in a layer here. So we're going to click OK. Choose any color that you like. Go through and try different things. Start, again, let me show you how I did that. Okay, double click that little box there. It's going to open up the color picker. Start over here on this line, so pick a color, and then you can kind of check the different ranges from really, really saturated to a little bit lighter. So over here, this is more of like a blue color. If I go down here, it's a little bit darker. If I go up here, it's a little bit more intense or saturated. Find the thing that looks the best for you and matches whatever colors are in your picture. And say, okay, I don't love this color. You know, I do like pink and purple. That's actually not too bad, right? So the contrast that comes from choosing one of these middle values isn't too bad. So let's go ahead and choose that. And finally, we are ready to save our work. Now, if you want to save the layers so that you can edit them after the fact, you're going to have to save it as a Photoshop file. So File, Save As, and Save as a Photoshop file, okay? If your save window looks like this, click this little down caret. And this down caret here, you're going to save it, for working on a MacBook Pro with Google Drive. That's probably a good place to save it. I'm going to save it to the desktop just because this is a computer I don't use often and I can easily upload it. Stansfield Toon example.psd. The format should be a Photoshop file if you want to save your layers. I'm going to go ahead and click Save and maximize compatibility, click OK. This is generally how I save Photoshop files, and it might take a while because it's a huge file. If we wanted to save this in a way that we could use it on the web, or we could share it, or we could use it as our profile picture, maybe on Google Drive or something like that, well, we're going to have to save it as a JPEG. So let's do that. File, Save As, and we're going to change the format from Photoshop to JPEG. Now it's going to pop up this little yellow triangle that says, File must be saved as a copy with this selection because it'll get rid of the layers. JPEGs won't save layers. Why did we save as a Photoshop first? Because maybe we're going to want those layers down the road. In this case, let's go ahead and save it Stansfield Toon example.jpg, and I'll just know that, the difference between PSD and JPG. The PSD is editable, the JPEG is not. I could also do something like this, the same file name and then dash web or dash screen or something like that, something to kind of distinguish or differentiate this file. It's merging the layers, so it's going to make one single layer here, you can see, and then I'm going to go ahead and select Quality 12 and click OK to maximize the quality of the image. It may take a little while for that to save as well, and then we can close and maybe work on another picture. So thanks for following along. I know this was quite a bit. This is really, this three-part video is designed for beginners in Photoshop who don't have a lot of experience working with layers or the brush tool, all these kinds of things. You're going to want to also follow along with the Adobe blog, the step-by-step instructions in the video to get through this and be able to use this action really effectively. Once you understand those couple of basics that I introduced you to, you should be able to run this action really at the click of a button. You have something that's super cool. And then it's just a creative decision, right? After that, you're just sort of looking at like, oh, do I like the lines that are sort of radiating from the middle? Do I like the pattern for the background? What kind of colors do I want? What kind of sloppiness do I want? And then doing minor edits to the photo overall. So there you have it.